Hello everyone, welcome to You Suck at Coding. So this video is the part 1 of a 3-part tutorial series in which you'll learn how to create authentication using the MERN stack. MERN is again an acronym for MongoDB, Express, React, and Node.js. So without further ado, let's get started by looking at what the finished application will look like. Alright, so here we are at the application. See a branding logo at the top that says You Suck at Coding. It has a pointer cursor. Clicking on this takes us to the home page, which is just a template page with some styling that says home. We also have two other options in the nav bar that says sign up and log in, and they take us to the respective pages, sign up, and log in. So let's get started by filling up the form and see how this works. Username and email, and in the password we have this visibility on and off toggle. So I'll start writing a password. So we see some validations that appear as soon as I start typing, and right now 2 of them are green, which is at least 6 characters and 1 lowercase letter. So if I keep changing, let's do an uppercase and let's add an exclamation and a number. So now this is a valid password that will work once I press submit. There's also confirm password, in which as soon as I start typing, it says password does not match. And once I have the password right, it will say the password does match. All right, so it says password does match. And now the submit button, which was disabled earlier, is now enabled. Clicking on this takes me to the login page, and we have a toast notification that says sign up successful, please log in to proceed. So let's do that. As soon as I press submit, it says invalid email or password. Probably messed up the password. Right, so it was one after that. Says login successful, and instead of home in the home page, it now says Jerry's home. So Jerry is obviously the username over here that we entered while signing up. And now we see that in the nav bar, the 2 options that said sign up and login have now been replaced by logout. So if I press this, it takes me back to the login page, and now there's a toast notification saying logout successful. So that is about it for what we'll be building in this tutorial series. So let's get started by building the front end, which is the part 1. Okay, so we have the VS Code editor open now. I've already gone ahead and set up a MERN stack project. We see it's called MERN auth, and it has 2 subfolders, client and server, which are the respective front end and the back end. If you want to learn how to set up a MERN stack project from scratch, you can do that using my previous tutorial, the link of which is in the description. So let's get started and go inside of the folder client, and inside of that, inside folder source and the file app.jsx. Let's do an npm start in the terminal. Inside of client, so I'll do a cd client npm start, and that should fire up the React project. Perfect. Let me just bring in window, resize my editor. Perfect. It says let's build authentication with MERN. So what we're going to do first is install Bootstrap inside of this project. So we'll be using Bootstrap for the header, which is the nav bar, for a responsive design, and also we'll be using Bootstrap CSS classes, utility classes for margins, paddings, and several other things. I will also be using Material UI styled icons and style components for this project. And for the front end, what else? For the navigation, we'll be using React Router. So we'll get started with Bootstrap first. Make this full screen. Bootstrap 4.6, which is the version that we'll be installing. So in order to install Bootstrap to your project, we need the CSS and the JavaScript. For that, let's just copy this first. Open up VS Code. Inside of VS Code, we'll go in the public directory and the file index.html, which is the main HTML file. So right before it says title, you can paste the CSS part and that installs Bootstrap CSS. For the JavaScript part, we'll be copying this entire bundle, and now that can be pasted right below its body, which is the body closing tag. So this successfully installs Bootstrap to a project. So now if I go inside of app.jsx and let's say I add a class, it's called march.5. Perfect. So we have Bootstrap already. Let's go ahead and install Material UI and icons. I'm going to close this one, open up materialui.com. Let's get started. Go to installation and copy this npm install command, paste that inside our VS Code terminal. So I'll open up another terminal, do a cd inside of client, and then paste this. That should install Material UI. Meanwhile, let's look for the Material UI icons. These are the SVG icons which we'll be needing. Let's just copy that too. Open up VS Code, paste that, and that should install the Material UI icons for now. Let's just close this one and get back to the initial size. We'll also be needing React Router. So for that, I'm going to do an npm I React Router DOM. That should install that. So why we need React Router DOM is for navigation. So usually when we're switching between pages, we use an anchor tag for vanilla JavaScript. What React gives us, the React Router library package gives us a link which basically allows us to go from one page to another without a refresh or a state change, which is what we need for React apps. Perfect. So we have all of those installed. We can go to package.json and verify that we have Material UI installed. And also React Router DOM. Perfect. So we'll get started by creating a directory inside of source and call this pages. And inside of pages, we will be creating 3 pages that we'll be needing. That's home, login, and sign up. Inside, let's just create an H1 so that we know what page it is. Call it home. Similarly for login, and sign up. Perfect. So now what we can do is go inside of app.jsx and bring in parts that we need from React Router DOM. So I'm going to do an import. For an import, we need browser router. You can import it as router to make things cleaner. We'll also be needing route. And let's do a redirect that we'll be needing later on from React Router DOM. Perfect. Now inside of this div, what we're going to do, let's get rid of the margin first. We don't really need this one. So inside of the main div, I'm going to create a tag called router. And inside of router, we'll be needing a couple of self-closing route tags. I'm going to make this self-closing, copy this 2 more times. And so how route works is that we're going to give it a keyword, an argument exact, so that the path is exact. And now we write path. And for home, let's do a slash. Similarly, exact path. Let's do sign up for sign up. And then a slash login for the login page. Okay. So we also need to add components to this, but before we go ahead and do that, we'll need to import them. We'll write a comment that says components and then import the pages. Let's do home first, then pages, home, sign up, pages sign up. Similarly, login from pages login. What we'll do now is add component. We'll pass home to this one. Not components, it's component, my bad. This one, let's do sign up. And the last one, we'll do login. And also let's get rid of the H1. As you already see, we're at the home for the local host 3000. If I go ahead and type login, that should bring me to login. And similarly, sign up should bring me to sign up. Perfect. All right, I forgot to add H1 for the login and sign up. Not a problem. Let's do that now. Perfect. All right, so we have that set up. So now what we're going to do is create a header, a nav bar. So for that, let's go inside of source and create a folder called components. Inside of components, let's create a file and call it header.jsx. Let's do an H1 for this one too. Right, header. So what we want is for this header to be inside of all of the pages. So what we'll do before we write any code inside of this is go to app.jsx, import this at the very top, header from components and header, and add this at the top with the self-closing as a self-closing tag. Perfect. So we'll see that header is part of all of the pages now. If I go ahead, go to home, see header, and that is what we want. So now let's go to header. So for that, we'll be using a Bootstrap navbar. And for that, let's go to the Bootstrap documentation, 4.6, and look up some navbars. As we see, there's a bunch of options that we could use. Let's get something that's the closest to what we want to build. I think it's this one. So I'm going to copy this, go to the React app inside of VS Code, and paste this over here. All right, so as soon as I do that, we see that we already have a functioning nav bar on the right, which is responsive as well. It has a hamburger icon, which if I press, gives me all of the options, the nav links. If I make this full screen, yeah, it's expanded. All right, so let's go ahead and make some changes to make it look more like the one that we saw in the beginning of the video. And for that, the first thing that I'll be doing is get rid of some of the extra list items over here, because we just need the two, sign up and log in. And also replace all of the anchor tags with the link so that there is no refresh. In order to use link, we'll need to import it from the React router DOM. So we'll do an import link from React router DOM. And what we can do now is simply create this at the bottom, give it the name of the channel, socket coding, let's do class name for navbar brand, and we'll also be giving it a to, which is a link to, and this would be the home page, which is just slash. So we can get rid of this now, just the anchor tag, and we see that this brings us to the home page. Perfect. We can leave the button and the span as is. And let's go at the bottom and see the links. So again, we'll be replacing these two with the link tag. So let me just copy this, and we'll add the classes accordingly. Let's add this over here, here. So instead of navbar brand, it will be called a nav link, similar to the above anchor tag, and this one is going to be called sign up, and the link would be lowercase sign up. It's fine. We can get rid of this now. Just copy this, paste it over here. That it's easier. Change this to login. Add login over here. Get rid of the anchor tag again. So I'm just going to make this full screen for this one so that it's easier to see the changes. Do this, and you see that we have the sign up and the login over here. Perfect. Let's go back to the code, make this full screen as well. So now what we need to do is change the color to blue. So for that, I'm gonna change the background from light to primary, which is blue in Bootstrap. And also for the navbar text, I'm gonna do dark so that it's white. And you'll see that it already is looking almost identical to what we saw in the beginning. So what needs to change is for these two options to go at the right. And for that, we'll be adding a class to the unordered list over here, add a margin left auto, and that should automatically give it a margin left and take these two to the right. Perfect. So now one last thing that we need to do is to just change the classes to be called class names. Class is how we define classes in JavaScript, in vanilla JavaScript and HTML. For React, it's called class name. So let's do that. Perfect. So all of them are changed, and I think, yeah, we're done with the header. All right. So I'm just gonna make this back, arrange this as it was earlier. Okay, that looks good. Perfect. So now we're going to move on to one of the authentication pages. Since login is a smaller one, let's start there. I'm going to go to login.jsx, and inside of there, what I'll do is start with some of the imports. So obviously we'll be needing states. So for that, I'll import the use state hook. And also, like we said, we'll be using Material UI style components. So I'll be importing some of the components from Material UI. So let's add a comment design and do an import. Import a text field, which is similar to an input. Add the import. That would be from @MUI/material. Okay, perfect. So we'll also be needing some of the other imports that I'm just going to add. Okay, so we need input adornment, icon button, outlined input, form control, input label, and a button. So I'll explain these as we go import the form. We'll also be needing two icons. So one of them, so in order to get those, actually, I think the better way would be to show how you can access the icons. So let's make this full screen. Let's go to MUI.com again, and you can go to get started. Look at some of the components. So here is where I can find all the components. So you'll see that there's button, and they have really nice examples for everything that you want. Let's say I want this button in my application. I can just simply press this button that says show full source, and that should give me the exact code that I need to have this button. Similarly, the icons, so we'll go to material icons, and for the visibility icon, I can simply type the keyword visibility. If I can type the spellings correctly, perfect. And it shows me the visibility and the visibility off that I can simply import from here. So let's say this is the visibility icon, and similarly, I'll be importing the visibility off icon inside of the project. All right, so let's do that. I'll go back to the project and paste the imports from Material UI, which is the visibility icon and the visibility off icon. Perfect. So let's get started by adding some states. Make a comment form states. Now for the login page, let's open up the login page. We'll be needing the email, the password, and we'll also be needing a show password state, which is a boolean. So let's get started with that. Email, set email state initialize this with empty strings. Similarly, let's do it for password. Also, show password. Password use state for this one is going to be false because we want the password visibility to be off in the beginning. That is it for the states that we'll be needing for this one. So let's get started by building the form. At the main div, I'm going to add a class name. And for the class name, I'm going to say container. So it adds some margins from the left and right to a margin top 5. Let's add a margin bottom 5 too. And let's give this width of column 10 if it's a small size. If it's an extra small size, sorry, for small, let's do column small 8, so that if the size is small or bigger, the column, the width is 8 in Bootstrap. If it's a medium screen, we want this to be 6. And if it's a large or upper, let's do 5. Right, so these are the classes that I've added for a responsive design. We'll see this in works just in a couple of minutes after we create the form. So let's delete this h1 and add a div. Inside of that div, let's add a label and call this login. Perfect, so we have this login. So I'm going to add some classes to the parent div. We want this to be centralized, so let's do a text center. It brings this to the center. Let's do a margin bottom 5 for this one. And we want to make it look like an alert. So let's do an alert, and we want this alert to be blue. So an alert primary, that's what it gives us. And for the label, we want this to be bigger, almost like say an h2. So we'll add a class name and give it h2 so that it's big. Perfect. So that's it for the label, and now let's get started with the form. Create a div, give it the class form group, and inside of the form group I'm going to use a Material UI component called text field, which is a self-closing tag. Let's take care of that. And you see that we already have a text field which is open at the top. So what I want is for the size to be small, so it makes it smaller. Perfect. And we want an outlined variant, so we'll add variant outlined. That doesn't change anything, maybe that's the default, that's why, no problem. We are going to add a class name of form control, and that should change the design a bit. Perfect, makes it full screen for the column 10 that we had added at the top. And now we want to add a label to it. So for the label, it will be called email. And you see that now it says email, and if I press on this input, it takes the input at the top and I can enter the email. Perfect. And it's back if it's empty. All right. So let's just do the form first, and we'll add the states and the onChange functions later. So I'm going to leave this for now and create another div, a form group. Form group class, and this one we're going to be using the form control. So how I've created the password field with the visibility on off, you can simply go to Material UI, look for, let's say I'm going to search for password. So it says text field, use an icon button to hide or reveal the password. So if you click on that, you'll see numerous examples. Let's say this one aligns to what I want to do. So what I can do is similar to what I showed earlier, just press on this show the source, and I can look for the code specific to this particular component, which if I'm not wrong is this one. So you can simply copy this and paste it into your project, and that should give you exactly what you see over here. Perfect. So let's just add this manually for this one. We won't be copying it from Material UI. Add a form control similar to what we saw, and that will be a tag. So we want the variant to be outlined. again, size to be small. And let's add the styling of form control. We have the class name from Bootstrap. Form control. Perfect. So inside of the form control tags, we want to define an input label that we've already imported. The input label is going to be called password. We have the password showing now. And now let's do an outlined input, which should be a self-closing tag. So let me just get rid of that. And now again, inside of it, we'll be doing the label. Let's call it password. It now starts looking like the email text field, but why we're building it differently is because we want the visibility on and off. That can only happen if we build it using the form control, the label, and the outline input way. Inside of the outline input, let's just go ahead and add code snippet. So it will do end adornment. That is for the end of it. And inside of that, create curly brackets, and inside, let's do an input adornment. We want this to be in tag form, the input adornment. The tags. Perfect. So we have the two tags that we need for this one. Now we're going to create another tag, which is icon button. So why we use icon button is because we want it to be clickable, and the icons by themselves are not clickable. So we use the tags icon button to make it clickable. And inside of icon button, I'll be dropping in, first of all, let's add edge. So we want this to be at the end. And this is where the icons will go. So let's add the visibility icon. And that should be a self-closing tag again. So we want this to switch, and we'll switch it based off of the state that we created earlier, which is called show password. It's a bool. So by default, it will be false, and we'll see the visibility off icon. And when it turns true, we'll see the visibility icon, which is shown right now. So we'll be adding the code over here via conditional rendering. So let me just add both of the icons first. Let's do the visibility off icon. Okay, let's get rid of that, make it closing. And inside of here, I'm going to add the state in curly brackets. Let's do show password, and this is a conditional operator. It says with a question mark that if show password is true, we want to have the visibility icon, which means that the password is showing. And if show password is false, for that we add a colon. And this is where the false part goes. We want to show the visibility off icon. It should be the default. So right now it's going to change as is, but for now it shows the visibility off icon. Clicking on this doesn't do anything because we haven't actually added the on change. Let's keep building the form, and we'll go ahead and add the button now. Outside of this div, inside the main div, we'll create another div and give it a class name of, let's say, text center, because we want the button to be centralized, and we also want to give it a margin top of 4. Perfect. So we have the div. Let's add the button to it. Okay, so inside of the button, let's add some information. So the variant, we're looking for a contained variant, which is a full color. Let's add the text first, call it submit. This is what the button looks like. And we want this to be disabled if the email is not present. So not email, or the password is not present. So now you see that the button has turned gray, and as soon as I start typing some information in email and password, it would turn blue again, and it will be clickable. So for now, it won't change because we haven't actually added the states. So let's go ahead and do that and see that it works. I'll go to the very first, which was the text field, and inside of the text field, I'm going to add the value and the on change. So value would be email, and on change. So what we're doing over here is when the value changes, we get an event, and we want the email to be set to whatever the event's value is. So event.target.value, and that should actually change the email whenever the user is typing another text. Similarly, for the password, we'll be doing that. So let's add the value, outline input. Let's add it over here. Let's do a value of password, and similarly do an on change. The set password to event.target.value. Let's see if this is working. Yeah, as soon as both of the fields are filled, the user is able to press submit. That's what we want. So that's good. So now let's take care of this visibility part. So for that, what we will be doing is first and foremost, we'll add an on click to the icon button. So let's go to the icon button. Over here, let's actually do end on click. And for the on click, what we want is every time this button is clicked, we want the show password field, so set show password, to be the opposite of what it is. So if it's false, make it true. If it's true, make it false. Let's do a not show password, and that should do the trick. So we'll see that it's changing now. It's switching between the two icons. So what we also want is this field not be text and be a type of password, and this to switch every time we press this. And for that, the trick is to add a type of input, and by default, if I make this type of input to password, this is just going to be a password field, so I won't be able to see anything. So what we want to do is change this type from password to text every time show password is true. And for that, let's add curly brackets to a conditional operator again. It says if show password is true, the type should be text, and if it's not true, if it's false, the type should be password. Okay, so right now it's true. If I turn it to false, it's a password field, and that is what it will be by default. So let me go ahead and refresh this, cherry@cherry.com, and then for the password, if I add something, it's this. If I click on this, I can see the password. Similarly, it goes away. Perfect. So I guess in terms of the design, that is about it for the login. And now we can move on to the sign-up page. So for the sign-up page, let's just go to the sign-up inside of the application. What we're going to do is copy everything from the login and paste it inside of the sign-up component, since sign-up is basically a superset of login, and we'll make the necessary changes. Let's change the component name back to sign up at the top and at the bottom, and also change the label from login to say sign up. Now what we'll need is to add some states. So we need the username and the confirm password. So let's start by adding those. Adding a confirm password, bottom of password. Okay, both of them empty strings. So what we can do now is basically add the additional text fields that we'll be needing for those two states. So let's go with copying this email div, paste it just above it, and change the label, say username, value to again username, and set email to say set username. Perfect. So we have the username set up. Now let's go ahead and add the confirm password. So copy the email div again, go at the bottom of the password div, paste it over here. We are going to change the label to confirm password, value to confirm password again, and set email to again set confirm password, e.target.value. So we'll also need to change the type from text to a password. Perfect. So now what we'll be doing is adding some validations to the password and the confirm password text fields. First of all, what we want is for the user to see a password does match or password does not match form helper text at the bottom as soon as they start typing a password or a confirm password. So let's go ahead and do that. And for it, we'll be first importing form helper text from inside of Material UI. And now what we can do is just below the text field of confirm password, we'll create this tag form helper text, and inside of this tag we want to conditionally render whether the password matches or it does not match. So with that, I'll be doing is creating two spans. One says password does match and the other one is going to say the password does not match, and we want the respective colors to be red and green. So we'll be adding a class name of text success, which gives the green color in Bootstrap, and a similar text danger for when the password does not match. Alright, so we want these to be displayed based off of whether the condition is true or false, and for that we'll be adding a conditional operator inside that says password triple equals to confirm password, which is a strict equality. So if it is equal, we'll display this span. So let's go ahead and paste it over here. And if it isn't, we'll be displaying the second span. Let's add it with a colon, and here we go. It says password does match, and as soon as I start typing, it displays password does not match. So that is happening because password right now is an empty string, and as soon as you start typing, confirm password has a value, so it turns truthy, and that's why it displays password does not match. So we also want is to add a validation, and that validation would be again a conditional rendering whether this thing should be displayed or not. So we want this form helper text to be displayed only when password and confirm password both are truthy, so they're not empty strings. So let's go ahead and add a condition that says password and confirm password and this entire form helper text. So now as soon as the user starts typing and we have both the password and the confirmed password, only then this text will display. Perfect. So let's add some class names and styling to this. We'll add class name to the form helper text. Let's do a margin left 1 and a margin top of 1, 2. Perfect. Alright, so that's about it for the confirm password field. Now what we're going to do is add some validations to the password because we want the password to be secure and we do not want the user to keep a weak password. So for that, what we're going to do first is create some variables. So I'm going to name them, add a comment called password validation, and we'll be creating some variables using the regular expressions in JavaScript. So let's get started. The first one would simply be a length one. So we'll say let has 6 characters. So we want this to be true if the length of the password is greater than or equal to 6. Now what we also want is to create one that says has a lower character. So this is going to be true if the user has at least one lower character. For that, the regular expression is this. Anything from lowercase a to z would be fine. Similarly, for the has upper character, the regular expression is going to be very similar. It's just that we'll be changing the lowercase az to the capital A and Z, and that is for the has upper character. Let's create one that says has a number, and for that we'll be basically replacing the alphabets with numbers 0 to 9. So anything from 0 to 9, if they have at least 1, this would test as true. And now let's do one for the special character. So we'll say has special char, and for this to be true, it has to be anything other than the alphabets lowercase, uppercase, or numbers. So we have this not, and we have all of these mentioned: A to Z, lowercase, uppercase, and 0 to 9. And that is about it for the variables. And now let's go ahead and add these to the bottom of the password. So right below it says form control. What I'm going to do now is create a div. So let's start with that. And we'll add a class name of margin left 1 to it. So let's do ml1. That's fine. Inside of that div, I'll create another div. And inside of that div, I want a small tag. For the small tag, we want this to say at least 6 characters. Okay, so there is at least 6 characters. Now, similar to the confirm password, we want this to display in red by default if it doesn't have at least 6 characters. And if it does have 6 or more, we want this to be green. So for that, we'll be adding conditional classes for this one. So how we'll do that is inside of the small tag, let's do class name. And for this, let's write the variable name, which is going to be has6 char. And a conditional operator that says if it is true, let's do a text success. And if it's false, let's do a text danger. So now you'll see by default, it's going to be red. And as soon as the length exceeds 6 or more, it goes to green. Perfect. So for the other ones, what I'll do now is simply copy this div and paste it 4 more times, and then take it from here. You'll see we already have these 5 conditions listed. So we'll just go ahead and make the changes now. So from has6, let's change it to has lower case, and we'll change the text to 1 lowercase letter. I think maybe the name was a little different. Oh, it was has lower char. My bad. So let me change this to say has lower char. Alright, similarly, we'll have 1 for the uppercase. So that would say has upper char. And the text would be 1 uppercase letter. Let's move on to the number, because has number, we want to call it 1 number, the label. Now let's move on to the special character, which is has special char, and we want to call the label 1 special symbol. Perfect. So as I'll start typing the password, let me try this out. You'll see that these conditions would become true, and then the red is going to turn as green. Perfect. We also want this to be displayed into columns, and for that, what I'm going to do is go at the top div and add an inline styling. So for that, I'll add a style keyword, double curly brackets, and do columns 2. And that should divide these nice and clean into columns. What we also want is for this to not be displayed when the password field is empty. So for that, let's add a validation to this div that it only shows when the password exists. So let's do that. Create the brackets, go at the top. So this would be displayed only if password has been entered. So now it goes away. So as soon as I start typing as the user, it comes back. Now what the next and the last step for the sign-up form is going to be is to disable the button based on the respective conditions. Since we had copied it from login, it right now says just email and password. So if we have the email and password, it would be enabled again. So let's add the additional states that we created, starting from the username. All right, so we need the username too. It goes back, let's add the username. It's enabled now. What we also want is confirm password. So let's add not confirm password. Becomes disabled. Let's add the password. Now what we also want is to be disabled as long as the password does not match and any of these conditions are false. So for that, let's add some code. We'll say another OR with password is not equal to confirm password, and say not has 6 char, not as lower char, not as upper char, not as number, and the last one not as special char. Okay, so now let's see this in action. We have a username, email, and password. The password does not match, so let's match the password, and this becomes enabled. As soon as, even if one condition does not match, the button will be disabled again, and vice versa. Alright, so that's about it for the sign up page. Now what we're left with in the front-end design is the home page. So let's go to the home page, the home component, and the home page inside of the app. So I'll be adding a class name of container and to a text center for the text to be in center. Perfect. We'll also be adding a margin top with inline CSS, and let's say 12 rem. That should be good enough. Inside of the div, what I'm going to do is create another div and give it a class name of alert. So we'll do an alert. We want a blue one, so alert primary. Let's put the h1 inside of this div. Now what's left is to add some padding to it. Let's do padding 5, and that looks pretty good. Right. So this concludes the part 1 front-end design of our application. In the next video, we'll learn how to create the backend for our authentication app. If you enjoyed watching the video, go ahead and like the video and subscribe to the channel. This is Banish at You Suck at Coding. Until next time, peace.